and welcome to Public Sector I Heart You podcast. Pleased to be joined today by Neil Armstrong, Chief Commercial Officer from Tribepad. I'm Kat Whitby, Senior Consultant here from WME, and today we're going to be talking about ghosting and the impact to a candidate or customer. So welcome, Neil.
Thank you.
Hope you're well. It's great to join us on our first podcast series, so thank you for being here. We are here today to talk about a recent report that Tribepad have produced, which is a really interesting topic around ghosting, and we'd just love to know a little bit more about what the report showed and why you did that research into the topic.
Yeah, thanks for having us. The end ghosting report we commissioned last year and had a refresh of it this year to get some updated data. And we were aware that there were increasing reports in the media and also in our own personal networks, professional networks about candidates being ghosted. It's pretty much a dating term. You apply for a role and you hear nothing. Or you apply for a role and you get to interview and worse still, you hear nothing. Or even you're offered a job, accept the job, and then the employer goes silent for some reason. So we were really interested in this as a behaviour.
Yeah.
Why is this happening, and what's the impact for the candidate, and what's the impact for the organisation? We asked about 2,500 candidates what their experience of ghosting was in the recruitment process. And it was pretty shocking. When we first did the research, 66% of candidates said they had experienced ghosting in the recruitment process, which was pretty shocking. Yeah. Now, the good news is when we have updated the research just recently, it's come down to 43%, which is a really significant reduction, sort of 50% drop. However, 43% of candidates being ghosted by employers, it's not good enough. And we know it has a really negative impact for the candidate. But what this research has shown is there's also a really negative impact for the employer. So I think that's something that we should all consider.
I think that's fascinating, actually, that the reduction was so significant, 20%, improvement. And I think you're absolutely right. There is such an impact to the candidate and the brand. Did you kind of do any research into what impact that actually has? What impact does it have on a candidate, and does it have on a brand?
Yeah, I mean, if we take the candidate to start with, and ghosting affects different people differently, of course. So, for example, men are more likely to be ghosted than women. And that's a really interesting one. So men, sort of 46% of men said they'd been ghosted, whereas it was 38% for women. So it's a small difference, but we wonder if that's significant. Something that we've, people will be aware of in recruitment. Often, men will apply for a role where they perhaps meet 6 out of the 10, essential characteristics, and they'll chance their arm and say, "Yeah, I'll apply for that. I'll probably be good enough."
Yeah.
We know women are less likely to do that, and they're more likely to apply for a role where they tick 9 or 10 of the characteristics. So perhaps men are being ghosted more because they're applying for more jobs that they're actually not very suited to. So that's pretty interesting. I think the other thing that's really shocking is the mental health impact it has for candidates. We all know not knowing the outcome of something is sort of worse than being told the outcome's negative, because you're left wondering, you don't have closure, and you just got this constant dissonance. So what we know is that 87% of candidates who had been ghosted said it affected them negatively, emotionally. And that ranged up to 12% of people who said they were really seriously impacted. So we know this is literally bad for people. They're trying to put money on the table. They're trying to find a job that is helping lift them out of poverty potentially. So to not hear back, it's crushing. Particularly if they've got through to the interview, they've put perhaps hours of effort in. To then not hear back, it's a pretty awful thing for the candidate.
And I think that's really interesting to hear us talk about the emotional side of it, because I don't know about you, Neil, but we tend to focus a lot on the process and the data and being fast and making sure that we've got the speed there. But actually, how often do we think about the feelings and the impact that it has on the people that are going through that process? So I think actually the study there around the well-being and the impact that it has, I think is a really interesting approach.
Yeah, it's really interesting that the emotional side of it for the candidate. It's worth also considering what are the downsides for the employer. So 91% of people who say they have experienced ghosting are left with a negative impression of the employer. So there's a really famous in recruitment circles, a famous case study that was done by Virgin Media some time ago, recently, where they looked at the cancellation rates of their broadband and TV package after somebody had been for a job interview and had been unsuccessful. And they worked out that they were losing, it was several £1 million worth of revenue per year from people who'd come to Virgin for a job, hadn't got the job, had left the process unhappy, and had therefore cancelled their subscription.
Okay.
So, that's one example. We know for our own customers, particularly those in perhaps retail and hospitality, it's very easy to walk into a different fast food brand, a different high street store. If you've had a poor experience during recruitment, it can literally cost your organisation millions. So focusing on that candidate experience is essential. In the public sector, I'd say it's even more important where, we are here in the public sector to serve our community. And if our community is unhappy with the experience they have interacting with a council or a local authority, perhaps that's going to increase the chances of them being antisocial or not paying their taxes. Who knows what the implications are? But certainly from a trust and a buy-in to the local government system, it feels like there's a real incentive there to make sure there's a great candidate experience. Because let's face it, 9 out of 10 people who apply for the job are not going to get the job. I think it's natural that a manager who's looking to recruit somebody into their team, they're very focused on, well, I need to hire that person. It's quite easy for them to forget about the 9 or even 95 people who don't get the job.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's how often do we think about our candidates as customers? Do we perceive them in that way? And I know within the public sector, one of our challenges is our brand and why people would want to work in the public sector and promoting all the opportunities that we have. So there's a heck of a lot of work happening in our region around attracting to the sector.
Yeah.
But actually, are there things that we could do within the process around the experience? Are we ghosting candidates and what impact does that have? Because we might spend a lot of time on the EVP, but if there are things that are then falling down through the process, I think is kind of really interesting. And the fact that Virgin Media have taken that approach of putting a value against it.
Yeah, and other organisations have done that. I've seen something from Jaguar Land Rover, again, where they looked at their early careers process, where perhaps son or daughter applied, didn't get the role, and then father or mother was dissuaded from spending £70,000-100,000 on a new car.
Yeah.
So there's real cost there. I mean, some great news from the West Midlands region point of view is we're outperforming London, for example. So in London, 60% of candidates say they've been ghosted. In the West Midlands region, that's much lower at 34%. So perhaps your members are already doing a great job on the candidate experience and outperforming the market, but that's still a third of candidates who are potentially having a bad experience, who could be having a better relationship with their local government authority.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that, Neil. I think the other area was around, because you mentioned the age profile or the gender profile, I think, of men applying versus women.
Yeah.
Were there any other interesting insights and demographics that you saw in the report and the research?
Yeah, absolutely. Age was a really critical factor. So when we look at candidates who are under the age of 18, for example, 69% of candidates, so a large majority of candidates said that they were experiencing ghosting. That might be as a result of the kind of jobs that they're applying for. They're more likely to be, by factor of their age, entry-level jobs. Perhaps they haven't got the right experience. Perhaps they don't know what to apply for. Perhaps they're actually applying for hundreds of different roles with a bit of a scattergun approach, and lots of them aren't suitable. The flip side of that is when we look at candidates who are over the age of 55, just 28% of those candidates are being ghosted, or they report that they're being ghosted. So again, you can look at that of these aren't necessarily candidates with more experience. Perhaps they're more discerning about the jobs they're applying to. Perhaps they're only applying to jobs they've got a really good fit for that are more senior and therefore perhaps receiving fewer applications. So the recruiting team, the hiring managers have more time to go back and give good feedback as to why they didn't get the job. But that also ties into the emotional impact. So what we see is older people tend to be a bit more resilient from rejection, whereas younger candidates are put off. We see in the media, in the statistics that are published, there's an increasing number of young people who have been out of work, employment and training needs, I think, for an extended period. And perhaps we're contributing to that in the recruitment industry by causing this emotional harm when people are being rejected. Perhaps we do need to be more aware of that.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's remembering that people are in this process. These are the humans. Whilst we're under so much pressure to achieve a lot of things, then that emotional awareness and could be helpful. But I do think it's really interesting to have those different insights and some of the data to support the conversations. So I think it's a really interesting piece of research. Do you think you'll be doing this again? Is this something that you'll do annually and keep a finger on the pulse?
Yeah, most definitely. It's such an important area, and I think what's important is also seeing the impact it has on the recruitment team. So we know that about a third of candidates who've experienced ghosting, they go on to ghost a recruiter. So it's sort of it's a self-fulfilling circle of negativity that if we can fix this process, the candidates will feel better. Perhaps they will be less likely to apply for unsuitable jobs. They'll be less likely to ghost us as recruiters, and the whole thing will be more positive. We're on a mission to make recruitment fairer, faster, and better, and that means well-being improvements for the recruiters and the hiring managers. And I think the point you just made about everybody's trying to do more with less. Budgets are being cut, headcount is under pressure, there are more candidates applying for roles, AI is making it easier to swamp the system.
Absolutely.
So it's there's a risk there that recruitment teams and hiring managers have even less time to focus on the candidates who weren't successful but could be the perfect hire for the next role.
Yeah.
So, keeping those candidates engaged and it's the old adage, isn't it? Treat people how you'd like to be treated. It's much better to just give a really simple, short rejection. It can be automated by the system than leaving somebody hanging, not knowing. I think that's the worst, it's just the not knowing is a really destructive feeling.
And I can imagine even depending where it is in the process, the time that it takes to apply. I think a number of organisations, we may have quite lengthy application processes and ask quite a lot of our candidates. So already there's that initial investment.
Yes.
So even that communication back to them to let them know where they stand. What would be your kind of top tips, Neil, that our organisations we can do tomorrow to help improve this process or experience?
I think there's probably three things I'd recommend. The first is setting out and having a good think about what do we want that experience to be and why. The second is having really good engagement with the hiring managers, because recruitment's a very small part of their role, but helping them to understand the importance of the candidate experience and not ghosting is critical. And then the third thing is actually using the technology to help, because clearly we all have only so many hours in the day. We're all trying to fit a quart into a pint pot. So having the technology to do the boring, repetitive administration takes that away, from the recruitment team and from the hiring managers, particularly in the early stages where there's lots of people. You don't need to give lots of feedback. Just a really short email is fine. As you say, later in the process, once the candidate has perhaps completed some assessments, gone through an interview process, at that point, we owe them more detailed feedback. And if they don't get it, that's when they're even more emotionally impacted. So, those three things: set out what you want the experience to be, make sure your hiring managers are engaged and understand it, and then use the tools to automate as much as you can so that you can free up your own time to focus more in the latter stages.
Excellent. Have you seen much success, Neil, in the whole the kind of the talent pooling piece? And because I really like what you said in terms of nurturing talent, and whilst they might not be a good fit for that role, they may be for another one. Have you seen much success of organisations really doing that and helping build those talent communities and that profile of the organisation? Because
I think it varies in different sectors and different types of roles. So what we tend to see is in volume recruitment roles, where you have enough candidates, and actually the challenge is to sift down to the ones you want as quickly as possible. There's a lot less talent pooling going on there because it's, you don't have a supply problem. So we tend to see organisations with really hard to fill roles. That's where they spend their time on the talent pooling, and it does work. Reaching out. You mentioned EVP earlier, making sure that those people are aware of you as an employer, why they might be interested. I think there is definitely pressure in the recruitment sector generally. People are overworked and understaffed. And naturally what happens is you work on the urgent, important things, and the longer term pipeline building and talent pooling is the thing that suffers, and sort of less time is spent on that. So again, it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. You haven't built that talent pool, so next time you need to find somebody, you've got to go and do a whole load of work because there isn't somebody waiting there. So it's a hard balance to get right.
And I think that just makes me think about it. It might not actually be one size fits all. It's a different experience for different roles, for different parts of the organisation. So thinking about that customer journey, what that looks like in different parts of the organisation, as well as you look at that process, I think could perhaps be helpful there. I think you've given us a lot to think about, Neil. I think that report sounds really valuable. I think kind of key takeaways around how often do we think of our candidates as customers? Would that change our behaviour, our approach to process design? Do we really use our tools and technology to help us and relieve some of the pressure in the administration? And also, do we have the data and the insight to understand maybe who we're not engaging with? And I wonder if we were to do that kind of research in our own public sector part of the region, what story that might look like. So,
well, I think that there's as I say, the data says that the West Midlands is generally doing better than the country as a whole, and significantly better than London already. So there is some positive work to build on.
Yeah.
You make a great point about data. As with all of these things, you've got to understand what's happening in the recruitment process. You've got to have data to be able to make decisions and go through that that improvement cycle of, we've got this hypothesis, we think this thing's broken, let's get the data, let's make a change, and then see if what we've done has actually improved it, or have we accidentally made it worse. So really understanding the data is critical.
Really appreciate you sharing your time and insights, Neil. So thank you for joining us on our podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Kat.
And thank you so much for listening to our Public Sector I Heart You podcast. We hope you've enjoyed listening to our conversation today.